Well, thank you. Thank you very much for that reception. And for the introduction. That was beautifully phrased. Beautifully phrased. And well deserved. You know, that is one of the things of a long and notorious career is that you do get a great many compliments. And I want to say right now that these compliments are really very difficult to take. I don't care whether you deserve them or not, it's just difficult to take them. Compliments always embarrass a man. I've been complimented a great many times in my life, and it always embarrasses me. I always feel they've not said enough. I was born modest, but it wore off. Ladies and gentlemen, how solemn and beautiful is the thought that the earliest pioneer of civilization is never the railroad, never the newspaper, never the missionary, but whiskey. Yes, you look history over and you'll see. Oh, I know, too much of anything is bad, but too much good whiskey is barely enough. And I noticed that some of you are having tea now. It does seem a bit early for afternoon tea. I've always considered tea an affront to lunch and an insult to dinner. But you folks seem to be enjoying yourself in this barn, so I am tempted to join you. Oh, I can find pleasure in a hot cup of tea from time to time, so long as I'm not served the substandard stuff. Let's see, Hannah. Yeah. Well, now I wish to begin at the beginning, lest I forget it altogether. When I was younger, I could remember anything, whether it happened or not. And I was born Samuel Langhorne Clemens in 1835 in the Show Me state. But I have a bond with your volunteer state. You see, although I was born in Missouri, I was conceived about 3 hours west of here as a crow flies. You see, before moving to Missouri, my family lived here for many years. In fact, my father invested in a vast plot of land over in Jamestown, Tennessee. And it's in Fentress County. 75,000 acres. And he paid a penny an acre for it. Buy land, they're not making any more. My father held on to that land for 20 years. But after he died, the family managed it all away and got nothing to remember the sale by. My brother, he found a chance to trade the final 10,000 acres for $250. There are two times in a man's life when he should not speculate, when he can't afford it and when he can. And enough about that. I reckon most of you folks know me by my pen name, Mark Twain. Well, that is a name that I gave myself when I was 28 years old. It refers to my days as a steamboat pilot on the Mississippi. You see, back then, when a crewman would cry out, "Mark Twain," that was his way of letting you know that the depth of the water was now at 2 fathoms, or 12 feet, meaning that it was safe to travel on the river. I thought that'd make a pretty good name. But I've spent most of my life now as Mark Twain, writing books and spinning yarns and shining a light on the peculiarities of human nature. From those lazy days on the riverbank with Tom Sawyer and Huckleberry Finn, I've had my share of adventures, both on paper and off. I've been through some terrible things in my life, some of which actually happened. But you know, you're only as happy as you make up your mind to be, and I have found contentment in my life. I came here today in hopes of making you folks smile, and maybe, just maybe, make you think a little bit too. Oh, and I ought to thank you for attending the services today. I nearly missed them myself. I came by railroad. It's one of those trains that has to stop and rest every 7 minutes. For 3/4 of an hour, I'm sitting there. You know, one of the passengers advised the conductor to take the cow catcher off the front end and put it on the rear. Because at the rate we were going, we were not going to catch any cows. But there was nothing to keep them from climbing aboard on the rear end. I tell you, if I have to go to heaven by railroad, I shall go the other way. Yeah, I hope you won't mind if I smoke. I can't see any harm in it, so long as there are no children present. I never began smoking myself till I was 8 years old. And even then, I was not constant. I was always ready to reform if I could see any profit in it. But the only profit I could ever see in it was the heavenly pleasure of giving up the reform and going back to smoking. Well, I came into this world asking for a light. I reckon I'll go out of it blowing smoke rings. Yeah. Well, you know, when I was just a young man studying for the gallows, I went west on the overland stage to San Francisco. I arrived there with a very bad cold. Now, a lady at the hotel advised me to drink a quart of whiskey every 24 hours. And another friend recommended exactly the same thing. Made a half a gallon. I'd been drunk before, but that was a masterpiece. Well, I went out there to San Francisco looking for a job. But I was very particular about the kind of job I would get. I didn't want to work. So I became a newspaper reporter. I hated to do it, but I couldn't find honest employment. I've often had to serve time that way. When I was putting together my first book, I did a stretch in Washington, and I was a newspaper correspondent. And every day, I would go over to the Congress, that grand old national benevolent asylum for the helpless, and I reported on the inmates there. It was very entertaining. I had never seen a body of men with tongues so handy and information so uncertain. Well, these boys could talk all day for a week and never get anywhere with it. Why, if one of those men had been present when the deity was on the point of saying, "Let there be light," we never would have had it. But if you want to know what the human race is truly like, observe it at election time. That is when the parade of half-truths goes marching by. It is a monument to the gospel that truth is stranger than fiction. You see, the candidates, they rearrange the facts to suit themselves. And then they keep the lies and the half-truths spinning in the air while the great gullible public cheers and shouts and stomps its approval the way they always do when a politician has just said something they don't understand. We can discount 90% of what the candidates say at election time and assign it to softening of the brain, because the contents of their skull can change places with the contents of a pie. And nobody'd be the worse off for it but the pie. Now, I'm not lying to you. I don't tell lies. I differ from George Washington. I have a higher and grander standard of principle. George could not tell a lie. I can, but I won't. I used to tell lies, but I've given it up. The field is overrun with amateurs. I don't mean to suggest that the custom of lying has suffered any decay. It couldn't, for the lie is eternal. It is man's best and surest friend, and it cannot perish from the earth while Congress remains in session. Old George Washington was said to be a boy when he confessed to chopping down his father's cherry tree. Of course, now we know that never really happened. Now, when I was a boy of 14, my father was so stupid I could scarcely stand to have the old man around. But by the time I got to be 21, I was astonished at how much he had learned in the last 7 years. Well, now I'd like to bring you a selection from Huckleberry Finn. This here's a book about a boy. Some of you have been boys, and the rest of you have had a good deal to do with boys. Now, Huckleberry is a story about a boy who lived a great many years ago in the Mississippi River Valley. He was ignorant, unwashed, insufficiently fed, but he had as good a heart as ever any boy had. And he was the only really independent person, boy or man, in the community. And for this reason, I suppose, he was continually happy. And this book, Huckleberry, shares his own story, all by himself. You don't know about me without you having read a book by the name of The Adventures of Tom Sawyer. That book was made by Mr. Mark Twain, and he told the truth, mainly. There are some things he stretched, but mainly he told the truth. Well, I never seen anybody but lie one time or another without it was Aunt Polly or the widow Douglas. Well, the widow, she took me for her son. Allowed she would civilize me. Shh. She cried over me, called me a poor lost lamb. She called me a lot of other names too. Of course, she never meant no harm by it. And then she took to dressing me up in some of them new clothes, and I couldn't do nothing but sweat and feel all cramped up. Pretty soon I wanted to smoke. But the widow, she wouldn't let me. She said it was a mean practice and weren't clean, and I should try not to do it anymore. Ain't that just the way it is with some people, though? They get down on things when they don't know nothing about it. She took snuff, too. Of course, I was all right because she done it herself. And then her sister, Miss Watson, a tolerable, slim old maid with goggles on. She's all the time saying, "Don't put your feet up there, Huckleberry. Don't scrunch up like that, Huckleberry. Sit up straight. Can't you try to behave?" And then she told me all about the bad place. And I said, I wish I was there. She got mad then. But I didn't mean no harm by it. All I wanted was a change. All I wanted was to go somewheres. I weren't particular. Well, she said she was going to live so as to go to the good place. I couldn't see no advantage in going where she was going. So I made up my mind I wouldn't even try for it. Well, I've been going to school long about 4 or 5 months. I learned to read and write. and say the multiplication table up to 6 times 7 is 35. I don't reckon I could get any further than that if I could live forever. And then one night, I lit my candle and went up to my room, and there sat Pap, his own self. Oh, he tore into me something awful for dressing up, putting on airs, and going to school. And then he catched me, and he took me up the river to a little log cabin over on the Illinois shore. Well, I never got no chance to run off. Pap, he was so handy with his hickory. I couldn't hardly stand it. I was all over with welts. And then once, after he'd been drunk over in town, he come back saying how folks were saying that there was going to be another trial to get me away from him and give me to the widow for my guardian. Then he got to cussing. He said, "Oh, I'd like to see the widow get me." Oh, whenever his liquor bun gone to work, he most always went for the government. And this time he says, "Oh, they call this a government? Why, just take a look at it and see what it's like. Why, here the law stands ready to take a man's son away from him. Man's own son, which he's had all the trouble and all the anxiety and all the expense of raising. And just when that man gets that son raised up, ready to go to work, do something for him, give him a rest, while the law up and goes for him, and they call that a government? Why, a man can't get his rights in a government like that." Old Pap, he was carrying on so he never noticed where his old limber legs was a-taking him. And he went head over heels over a tub of salt pork, barked both shins. Rest of his speech was the hardest kind of language. And then he let out all of a sudden with his left foot, and then he fetched that tub with a rattling kick. But it weren't good judgment, because that was a boot that had a couple of his toes leaking out of the front end of it. Well, I run off from Pat pretty soon after that. I hid out over on Jackson's Island. That's where I met Miss Watson's Jim. He said he'd run off too. Oh, well, now, I promised I wouldn't tell on him. I knowed I'd done wrong. I knowed folks would despise me and call me a low-down abolitionist. I didn't care, because I weren't going back there again anyway. Jim and me, we found an empty section of log raft, and we went off down that river together. Yeah, we run nights, and we laid up and hid daytimes. We just let that raft float wherever the current wanted it to. It is lovely to live on a raft. We'd lay on our backs, smoke our pipes looking away into the sky, not a cloud in it. Sky looks ever so deep when you lay on your back in the moonshine. I'd never knowed it before. And how fur a body can hear on the water such nights. I go sleep. Sometimes Jim, he wouldn't wake me when it was my turn to stand watch. But he often done that. And then when I woke up, long about daybreak, he'd be sitting there, head down betwixt his knees, moaning in the morning. Well, I never took notice nor let on, but I knowed what it was for. See, he was thinking about his wife and children way up yonder. And he was feeling low and homesick. Because you see, he hadn't ever been away from home before in his life. And I do reckon he cared just as much for his folks as white people does for theirs. Don't seem natural, but I reckon it's so. Yeah, we kept looking for Cairo down at the foot of Illinois, where the Ohio River comes in. We said we would sell that raft and then get on a steamboat. We go way up to Ohio amongst the free states, and then we'd be out of trouble. Jim, he said it made him all over trembly and feverish to be so close to freedom. He said how the first thing he would do when he got up to a free state, he would go to work, saving up money. And he wouldn't spend a single cent. And then when he got enough, he would he would buy his wife, which was owned on a farm near Miss Watson, and they'd both go to work and buy the 2 children. And if the master wouldn't sell them, he'd get an abolitionist to go and steal them. Shh. It most froze me to hear such talk. Well, Jim, he would never dare talk such talk in his life before. Coming right out, flat-footed, and saying that he would steal his children. Children which was owned by a man I didn't even know. A man who had never done me no harm. You see, I begun to get it through my head that Jim was already most free. And who was blamed for it? Me. It never come down to me before what it was, this thing I was a-doing. And my conscience got to stirring me up hotter and hotter. And finally I says to it, well, let up on me, will you? I'll paddle ashore at the first light and tell. Pretty soon one showed. Jim, he got all excited because he thought it was Cairo. But I said, no, Jim, let me paddle ashore in the canoe and see, because it might not be, Well, and then he got the canoe all ready for me. And he gave me the paddle. And I shove out. When I was about 50 yards off, he calls out, there he goes, the old true Huck, the only white gentleman that ever kept his promise to old Jim. Well, I just felt sick. Here I was, paddling off all in a sweat to tell on him. But when he says that, it kind of just seemed to take the tuck right out of me. I weren't right down certain whether I was glad I started or whether I weren't. And then I says to myself, well, I got to do it. I can't get out of it. But right then along comes a skiff with 2 men on it with guns. And they stopped. And I stopped. And one of them says, what's that yonder? A piece of raft. You belong on it? Yes, sir. Any men on it? Only one, sir. Well, there's 5 slaves run off tonight up around the head of the bend. Is your man white or black? He's white. They went off. Well, I knowed I'd done wrong. Guess it just weren't no use in me learning to do right. Well, if I'd gone to Sunday school and learned how to behave, I'd have known what to do. But you see, a body that don't get started right when he's little just ain't got no show. But then I says to myself, hold on. If you'd have done right and give Jim up, would you feel better than you do right now? Well, no, I says, I'd feel bad. I feel the same way I do right now. Well, then, says I, what's the use of you learning to do right when it's troublesome to do right and ain't no trouble to do wrong? And the wages is just the same. Well, I was stuck. I couldn't answer that. So I just shoved the whole thing right out of my head. And I said, well, I'd go back to wickedness again, which is in my line, haven't been brung up to it. And for a starter, I'd go to work and I'd steal Jim out of slavery. And if that meant I was going to hell, I just have to go on to hell. Oh, Huckleberry. It is a comical invention. the human race, any way you look at it. But sometimes it does seem a shame that Noah and his party did not miss the boat. People call me a pessimist in my old age, but I'm not. I am an optimist who did not arrive. Let's see. Yeah, and that's time to go. My feet are tired. And you're tired. And I'm feeling a little hungry. Your lunch looked delicious. Although I am partial to prairie chicken, you know, that is one of the secrets to success in life, is to eat what you like and let the food fight it out inside. But before I take my leave, I would like to say just one more thing. I have received hundreds and hundreds of letters in my life from all conditions of people, men, women, and children. And there was in them compliments, praise, and above all, and better than all, there is in them a note of affection. Compliment is well, praise is well. But affection, that is the last and final and most precious reward that any man can win, whether by character or achievement. And I am very grateful to have that reward. Thank you for your time and your attention here today, and for sharing a cup of tea. It has been a pleasure. Thank you. Thank you very much.